Byron is concerned about the unsustainable debt that our generation is passing on to our children. He has consistently invested in the community, serves as a youth leader in his church, coaches Little League, and volunteers on various services and non-profit boards and committees in Southwest Florida. He serves as chairman of the Board for Child Evangelism Fellowship at Collier County. He joined the Naples Tea Party in 2008 and became a member of the Naples Tea Party Leadership Council. He's dedicated his standing with the citizens of Southwest Florida to restoring the founding principles that made this the greatest country in the world. Please welcome him.
I won't be stumping for votes in this room. My congressional seat is down in Southwest Florida, Naples and Fort Myers of the great state of Florida. But for the people listening at home and for everybody in this room, my name is Byron Donalds. I am running to represent the people of Southwest Florida in the United States Congress to replace Connie Mack. And I'm in this race. Well, he's excited about that. Save your applause for later now. I'm in this race, frankly, because we need champions for individual liberty and limited constitutional government in America today. You know, that's our big problem. That's really the problem that we face. In my view, there are two jobs for the next congressman, not only of my district, but for all districts. The first job is you must go to Washington and craft policy, make sausage. You do the things and you put in place the economic principles that are going to guide our nation for the next 100 years. But there's also a second job, which I'm going to get to a little later. But let's focus on that first job, policy. I am of the opinion that the current tax code is immoral. It takes its money from you, the voters, the citizens, on the 1st and the 15th. It doesn't even ask you for that money. It just takes it through withholding. It doesn't even have the decency to pay you interest. The Chinese get interest, but you don't. I think the time has come for the fair tax, of which I am a supporter, which I will sponsor and I will fight for in the next Congress. Our biggest problem in America started with taxation. And in my view, if we're going to reverse course, you have to start with taxation again. Anthony Kennedy, when they were debating Obamacare, and the Supreme Court said that this individual mandate fundamentally changes the relationship between the federal government and the American people. And Anthony Kennedy was right. But that wasn't the first time it happened. The first time was with the 16th Amendment under Woodrow Wilson. It's quite interesting that the progressive left started with taxation as the building blocks for their vision. And I argue if we as liberty-minded citizens, if we as patriots are going to reverse course, we must start with taxation again. And that starts with the fair tax. Alexander Hamilton in the 21st Federalist said that consumption taxation would do a number of things, but it will also bind the power of those in Washington or in the federal government. And he's right, because the fair tax gives you the choice in paying federal income taxes. You would get all the fruits of your labor. No more would you have your money taken from you. There would be no more corporate income taxes or individual income taxes or capital gains taxes, payroll taxes, withholding taxes, or death taxes. When the federal government receives revenue, it would receive it because you, the American people, decided to engage in commerce. That sounds like putting taxation on our terms. I like that kind of plan. If we're going to begin a reverse course, we have to take the power out of Washington. And the number one way politicians get power is by writing new holes in the tax code that they later lament. The time's come in America for consumption taxation. The American people, when they hear about it, demand it. And if we're going to be serious about reversing course, it is time to throw out the tax code as it exists. It is time to move to the fair tax, and it is time to repeal the 16th Amendment. But that's just one policy. There are many more. If we're going to cut spending, really cut spending, we got to do two things. Number one, we have to end baseline budgeting. Right now the federal government's budgets automatically increase every year. The Congress doesn't even control spending anymore. They just allow the new baseline to be reset every year. Think about that. Do your budgets increase every year? Do the budgets of the owners of this building, does it automatically increase every year? But Washington does. And the reason why is because our representatives have decided it is in their interest to not control spending in Washington. If we ended baseline budgeting today, like has been sponsored by Louis Gohmert, Republican of Texas. If we ended that today and went to zero-based budgeting, the effect would be a $9.1 trillion cut in spending over the next 10 years. $9.1 trillion. S&P wanted us to cut $4 trillion. And we went through all kinds of shenanigans in Washington. We went to a super committee. We went to sequestration under the Budget Control Act. When all we had to do was change how we budget. Instead of allowing automatic increases, just go to no increases. Make it so that the Congress is responsible for appropriating dollars to every federal agency. If the EPA wants more money for a new program, it must justify that to the Congress or find it in their existing budget. That's how we have to begin to budget in Washington if we're going to really control spending. The second thing you do is cut cap and balance, or a similar plan that ties spending to the gross domestic product under an amendment to the Constitution. We've already seen that Congress lacks the restraint to control spending, so we must force their hand to control spending with an amendment to the Constitution. Now, let me cycle back to taxation real quick, because it's important that you marry these two subjects. They're not exclusive. If you look back in the history of this nation, we receive, the federal government meaning, about 18% of its revenue from the gross domestic product, on average, going back to 1960. I don't care who the president was, I don't care what the tax rates were. The government receives, on average, 18% of the GDP in revenue. So if we're going to be serious about cutting our deficits and paying off our debt, we have to do two things at the same time. We have to grow our economy, and we have to have a budget change and mandatory spending caps. That way, the additional money goes to only one purpose, and that's paying down the debt of our nation so that our kids are not left with that burden, which, by the way, they didn't vote for, and they never asked for. Under the fair tax, in the first year of implementation, independent analysis calls that the gross domestic product will increase between 7 to 10% in the first year. 7 to 10%. Right now, they're jumping up and down calling for recovery on 1.5% of growth. That's not going to get it done if we're going to begin to really tackle the serious problems, our long-term unfunded liabilities. So I will say again, if we're going to have enough revenue in Washington to pay down our debt, if we're going to have enough fiscal restraint in order to make sure that happens, we have to change taxation. We have to bring the billions and trillions overseas here to America so we can be deployed to do business here in America. And we have to constrain Washington with spending controls and a balanced budget amendment. But there's a third thing we have to fix, and that's health care. I actually believe the Supreme Court will strike down Obamacare. I hope they do, because if they do not, the Supreme Court will act like a super legislature, and that is not their role under the Constitution. And if our friends on the other side of the aisle weren't so hasty in passing that law, they would have put severability in there. But since they did not, and the individual mandate is unconstitutional, the Supreme Court has clear duty to strike down the entire law. But just because we repeal Obamacare doesn't mean we solve the problem. The real problem in healthcare is the delivery system. It's been a problem since World War II, since our men went off to war and our women had to go to work. And it was a big scramble of how are we going to insure them? And the decision was made, well, let the companies do it. Let the employers do it. And we never changed that system. The reason why health insurance costs continue to rise in America is because we are spending other people's money on other people. It's really that simple. Milton Friedman said there are 4 ways to spend money. The most efficient way is when you spend your money on yourself. The most inefficient way is when you spend other people's money on other people. You want to know where the efficiency of the market is most known? Right here. This is my Motorola Razr. I love this thing. You know, I can check all of my campaign emails. I can check my work email, my personal email. I can go on Twitter. My kids can play Angry Birds. I can watch 24 reruns on Netflix on this thing. This thing is amazing. And the reason why it's amazing is because I buy it with my own money. Because I operate in commerce looking for the best possible products at the lowest possible price. Really, because we all do. That's why these things get better year after year. No other reason. If our companies were responsible providing us with cell phones, we would still be using the Motorola StarTAC. There's some giggles. Everybody remember those. if the federal government was responsible for providing cell phones, and yes, there are a couple programs where they do, but if they were the primary responsibility for making sure we all had cell phones, we would still be using the big box cell phone with the fat antenna. Innovation comes when we are all operating in commerce to seek our own interests. Let me tell you how powerful these things have become. These things are so powerful now that all I have to do is turn on this one app, reach into my pocket, grab this little doohickey out, stick it into the top, and now I can take campaign donations. This is the power of innovation in America. This is the power. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the power of innovation in America. Imagine what would happen if we told our employers it was no longer their responsibility to provide health insurance. We end that tax subsidy that makes them buy it for our employees in America. And we allow people to buy their own insurance with pre-tax dollars. And if we adopt the fair tax, that won't be a problem. We break down these barriers that the states have erected so that they can control health insurance in the differing states. Imagine if we had a robust marketplace where you and I could decide how much health insurance we really want, whether it's catastrophic care, whether it's major medical, or whatever the case might be. Instead of having Motorola and Apple and Microsoft design the best possible products at the lowest possible price, we would have Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, and the like, designing the best possible health insurance package at the lowest possible price because they want your money. They want market share. You see, CEOs seek their own interests just like you and I do. For that matter, politicians seek their own interests as well. And if we use the power of the marketplace in healthcare, we will have already what is the greatest healthcare system in the world, a far better one, where all of our people will have the opportunity to buy the care that they desire for themselves, as opposed to it being told to them by a group of politicians in Washington, D.C. You know, when I go around my district, I talk about the real problems that we face. And those are policy matters. But the real problem in America today is not simply taxation. It's not simply spending, not just healthcare. Those are symptoms of the overall problem. And that problem is the role of government in America. That's the real problem we face as citizens. You know, I'm a fan of history. And if you're going to do political battle, you better know your history, because that will tell you exactly how to solve the issues we have today. In 1850 France, there was a philosopher called Frédéric Bastiat. He wrote an essay called The Law. I'm quite sure everybody in this room has read it. And he said he had this one excerpt, and this encapsulates what our problems are today. He said, depart from this point. Make the law religious, fraternal, equalizing. Make it industrial. And what you'll have is you will be lost in vagueness and uncertainty. You will be on unknown ground, being pushed to and fro amongst contending utopias. That's what he said. When you decide to have politicians subvert the law for one group of the people against another group of the people, we are being pushed to and fro. We are experiencing vagueness in our untold ground. We are in the midst of contending utopias here in America. And the only thing that will defeat that is individual liberty and limited constitutional government. Bastiat also said, that liberty is the destroyer of all despotisms, including legal despotism. Isn't that where we are today? Aren't we in the midst of legal despotisms, whether it's the Federal Reserve or the Treaty of the Seas, or any other treaty that they decide they want to think up, or Agenda 21? Why is it that we are so quick to overturn our sovereignty to the UN, to people who don't even live in this nation? Ladies and gentlemen, if we're going to be serious about reversing course in America, if we're going to be serious about preserving the greatest nation man has ever known, we can't just sit idly by. We can't just watch the same old go up to Washington, D.C., or to Tallahassee, Florida, or to your local county commission. It is the requirement of us, the citizens of America, to take back our politics. Plato said that those who are apathetic to their politics will be ruled by their inferiors. So when there are people who are asking you to walk a precinct, to walk your block, we ask you that, not just as a candidate or just as the Save America Foundation. We ask you that because without the people, there is no chance of restoring the greatest nation man has ever known. Ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. Do you really think Barack Obama is going to stand fast? You see what he just did with immigration. For that matter, do you think we have enough men and women in the Republican Party who are prepared to do political battle? Are they prepared? You know, in my race in Southwest Florida, I tell a lot of the citizens now, and I tell it more and more as we get closer to Election Day. You know who's prepared to do political battle based upon the fights they're willing to fight. Most of the guys who run for political office, and gals, they run because somebody whispered in their ear that it's their time and that we think you can win. Nobody whispered in my ear. But I don't fight fights because I think I can win. I fight them because they must be fought. And that is that is the kind of battle we have to be prepared to fight today. We don't have time for the next guy in line. We don't have time for the guy with the name you know or the guy with the most money. We don't have time for our citizens to be apathetic. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a country to save. My name is Byron Donalds. I'm running for the United States Congress in another congressional district. But I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your effort. We need it if we're going to preserve the greatest nation man has ever known. God bless you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, the real thing. Get your credit cards out, don't make them mad. We've got to put people like him in power or we're in all sorts of trouble.